Great. And we will get going. So I'm going to spotlight myself, and I'm going to start us off with the first bit. So welcome. I'm going to say it one more time, just in case you need any support or you find it useful. Use the closed captions option. You can go into the more section of the meeting now on the Zoom tab and look for captions, and you can actually choose which language you get them in. I think at the moment it might be to English, but if you need another language, then I think you can ask for it there. And please use the chat throughout the Zoom call. Tell us who you are, tell us where you are. You don't need to be part of an assembly group already. That's not the point at all. But if you are part of an assembly group, tell us which group you're a part of, what you're doing. Anything more you want to tell us, the more the better, as far as we're concerned. And also, as we go along, put your questions in there. We're going to be hoovering up those questions and we're putting them into a doc behind the scenes. And so when we get towards the Q&A sections, we will look back at those questions and pick out one. So as soon as one comes to mind, by all means, just put it straight in the chat. Okay, so welcome. This is the actually first, before we do that, I'm going to ask all the speakers that you're going to be hearing from today to introduce themselves. I'm jumping ahead. So first speaker is me. I'm Rob. I'm from XR UK Action Circle and have been working on the Community Assemblies Escalation Plan. And I will hand over to Marine.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marine. I am in the Citizens Assembly Working Group, so working on the third demand of Extinction Rebellion, and I've also been working on the escalation plan as well. I shall pass to Denise.
Hi, I'm the gardener for Wales, and I've been working with the Assembly crew and supporting the escalation plan as well. And I'm supporting local groups running assemblies around Wales. And I will pass to Dandelion.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see so many people of you here. I'm Dandelion. I'm in XR London and gardener for XR London. And yeah, also been part of the Community Assembly Working Group and supporting them with all kinds of support for local groups in XR. And I shall pass to Constanza.
Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see many people in the call today. So my name is Costanza. I am based in Manchester, and with my local group, that is the Didsbury-Willington group, we held a community assembly last month. So I'll tell you a bit about how that went and kind of reflections on our experience. I think I'm the last one, so I'll pass it back to Rob.
Thank you so much. Okay, so this is the Community Assemblies Escalation Plan. XR has been demanding system change since by transforming the political system for 5 years now. And it has never felt more important than in the last weeks. The licensing of new North Sea oil, the net zero rollback, the criminalization of humans migrating to find a dignified existence. I have never felt more ashamed of the politics in this country and that these things are done in my name and our names. And that's a sentiment that I've heard shared very, very widely. The political system, though, is not broken. It is working as intended, by the rich, for the rich, sacrificing ecologies and livelihoods in the pursuit of profit, with the help of the billionaire press shouting over the voices of communities, creating an extreme, polarized, and thus controllable landscape of ideologies. But bringing people together to make decisions undoes that on a very, very deep and fundamental level. Bringing people to come to an agreement on how their community should cooperate reverses that trend. And that is true democracy, and it's not what we have now. In the last 5 years, there have been citizens' assemblies and other assemblies thanks entirely or in no small part to Extinction Rebellion. You, everyone here who's part of this movement. And there are more and more assemblies being planned and discussed. And it's time now for us to capture that energy and take it up a notch. And that is exactly what the Community Assemblies Escalation Plan is doing. And this is the first time assemblies have been part of a long-term action campaign. So there has always been a citizens' assembly campaign. This is the first time that it's turned into something that's really an action-driven thing. And our real goal here is to get assemblies onto the lips of every movement and community, not as an alternative that might be nice and is intellectually interesting, but as something that makes us feel, well, that's there, that's tangible, that's happening. How on earth have we put off with this other thing for so long? So that's exactly what the assembly plan is about. So what are we going to do? We're going to solve local issues with deliberative democracy. So the seeds are sown, and what we do now will make new things possible. Everything that's been going on the last 5 years with Extinction Rebellion, getting assemblies onto people's lips, now we're into a new phase, and this is really, really exciting. Where we go and what we do now will transform the landscape again in a few years' time. So we're building and building by increments. It's taking us from that demand for a citizens' assembly, which happened, into something more and more tangible, something real and something like we actually wanted. So what we also hope is that this is going to grow the movement through all the community connections that we're making in a very, very real way. We're hoping that the community involves in all of the issues that are dear to each community in all of that diversity. And by doing that, by involving all these groups together in some plan that works for communities, we're going to hopefully grow the people who are engaged in MVDA, and I'll talk about that more, and how they go about getting their voices heard. And this put together will help us build towards XR's third demand for a community, for a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. So, part one, this is the plan. This is how we're going to do it. And this is trying to make it as simple as possible. Obviously, it's extremely diverse and complex. Every single community has their own way in which they have to deal with each other, own foibles, own idiosyncrasies. But the main aim is that we're going to have assemblies everywhere. There are already over 20 groups planning assemblies around the country. So the first thing is that each group should involve their community in the assembly process, making connections with local decision makers and influencers, deciding an issue, running an assembly process, and presenting that to the relevant local authority. And we're here to help identify which relevant authority that is, but you might be able to find that easily yourselves. So once you've identified the local authority and you've found out your topic, then you're going to hold an assembly and you're going to invite people to that assembly, and you're also going to really talk about the results of the assembly, because the most important thing here is that everyone knows that it's happening. Everyone knows and sees that this political change is happening. And then you're going to demand that the authority follows the advice of the assembly and future assemblies. So you're going to demand citizens' assembly, community assemblies in the community going forwards. And this is where we get to escalation. So we're escalating it locally. And this is how we do it. We publish the results and we say, well, wouldn't it be great if the authority adopted what we found as an assembly? And this is real, it's there. And wouldn't it be great if the authority held more assemblies? And we engage the community with those results and with what the authority says. And we imagine most authorities are going to say no, because it's giving up their power. So we expect many to do that, and that's when we escalate. So if it's appropriate, it may be that an assembly team and all the participants and the whole community, if possible, who've now know about the assembly, who've been engaged with it, decide to occupy the local authority building to have the results of that assembly heard. And that has happened already. So it's a pathway for communities to take what they care about and take action on that together. And that's the really, really key thing. And some people in that process will never have taken action before and would not have taken action without this process bringing them closer to it. So that's really another amazing element, I think, of this whole plan, that it brings people into action that's really close to them. And part three, this is the final part. This is going to be happening all around the country. And this means that it becomes a louder picture. It becomes something that now assemblies, it's getting more and more prominent in people's views, because our political system is so ruined at the moment. So at the same time, we'll be targeting MPs and sharing the assembly work that's going on. And we want MPs to connect with this work, because the whole engagement of this is to get us from the community all the way up to Westminster, all the way down, all the way up, assemblies everywhere. And so that's what we're doing. And eventually that'll come to an action where we demand that change on a Westminster level together, we expect, unless it happens, because it should happen. So I'm going to round up there on the plan. All the other speakers are going to talk in more detail about different parts of it. But I just want to say another quick word on working with other groups. So there are other groups who are already in the assembly space, and we want to work with them. Absolutely want to work with them, especially all those local community groups that are already working on local government issues. But we also think it's right to be honest about where we came from. This has come from XR. This is something XR has been doing for 5 years. It's something we really, really care about, and it's something we've always cared about. And that's really key. That's really a great thing, to bring more people into contact with the movement and show that the movement has actually always been about this. But it is also about community. So it's important that no one logo dominates. There could be 50 logos on a community assembly, or there could be no logos on a community assembly. But if you've just got one coming from one group, whether that's XR or another group, then you should be thinking about that. There's another group called the Humanity Project that many some may be aware of, that's also moving at roughly the same time into the same assembly space at the moment. So we have been in discussions with the Humanity Project, and we're communicating at the moment about how best our project and their project can work together in a way that works really, really well. So that's an ongoing process, and we haven't found out exactly all the ways in which those pieces fit together. But it's a nice relationship, and we're working together. In the beginning, the Humanity Project expressed a desire for distance from Extinction Rebellion in order to reach audience who may have acquired a stance to Extinction Rebellion. And this is because, trying to break out of the kind of environmental activist bubble was the word that was used. So the phrase that was used. So we also wanted to respect that there should be some distance there, and that's still something that we're working around and trying to understand how to work together if groups want to stay apart from a certain sort of tarnish, whether we would blame that tarnish on the media, which we would. And I think just all of this says that there's going to be a lot of ways in which we're going to have to work with each other very sensitively, and it's going to be different depending on which group it is. But I just wanted to say and to come towards the finish by saying there are already more than 20 groups in XR working on assemblies, and they're building on years of experience and established local group bonds and the relationship building of a long time, a lot of action, a lot of work, a lot of time spent together. So whatever any other group is doing, what XR's is doing is also really important. Whatever other assembly group comes on and wants to build on top, XR is doing this work in all these places already, and we should be really proud of that. And that's what gives me a whole load of hope, because I think XR can deliver on this sort of thing. But in the end, the more assemblies, the more groups are trying to get off the ground, the better for our aim of getting everyone talking about change and deliberative democracy. So there's going to be loads of support for your assemblies and actions all along the way. And all of this stuff is something that we have to learn together. And there's going to be lots more at the end of this call, talking about the specific support that's available right now. If any of this feels daunting to you, remember, it's not up to you to run an assembly by yourself. If there's not enough people in your community group or your local group right now, see if there's anyone else in local groups near you. Have a look in the chat right now, but also connect with us. We're going to try and help groups and people who are interested in this come together over distances. So don't feel daunted. It's not on your shoulders. We're going to do this together. Cool. I think that's me done. I'm going to hand over to Marine.
If I can unmute myself. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, and just to say, it's so exciting already seeing in the chat people from all these different groups and different backgrounds. I'm seeing MP Watch, I'm seeing JSO, I'm seeing Humanity Project. So it is actually already the dream of all these different projects working together. And yeah, so that's really wonderful to see. So thank you all for being here. I think we're going to move on to the next slide, please, Rob. Yes, so where we are obviously also different, apart from our years and years of experience in this, is that we have a very specific demand. So we have in XR, tell the truth, act now, and then decide together. And decide together is our demand for a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. So why do we need to care about the third demand, and how is it linked to these community assemblies that Rob has just been talking about? And why do we want as XR a citizens assembly, and why don't we just push for specific solutions? If I could have the next slide, please. So in a best case scenario, you have a government that starts to implement some policies that have to do with the environment or with climate change, right? But they come from their own sort of echo chamber, and they think, okay, this is a great idea, so let's do that. And what you end up with is pretty much always a disaster. So we have here on the left in France, we saw the Gilets jaunes who were protesting because the increase of pricing of petrol, which obviously really impacted people from lower incomes who were relying on their vehicles for work. And yeah, this social justice issue came up straight away, and people were extremely angry. Equally in the Netherlands, a policy was proposed where farmers had to decrease their number of livestock without real discussion about what these farmers were supposed to do instead. How were they going to be supported, or anything like that? And at the same time, subsidies for for fossil fuel heavy industries were continuing. So quite understandably, the farmers were extremely upset. There's been a debate about, you know, whether they care about climate change or not. That's sort of not really the issue here. There are a lot of farmers who are already on the front line of climate change and are very, very aware of it, but they are saying, where is the support? How are we going to do this? And this decision has been made by the folks in The Hague, where the government is, and no one's talked to us about it. And then here, a bit closer to home in the UK, the ULEZ, the ultra low emission zone in London, and the low traffic neighbourhoods have caused a lot of uproar, where again, this has been a policy made about the environment, about emissions and climate, but not properly deliberated on by ordinary citizens who are going to be impacted by this. And so it is seen as very unfair solutions by a lot of people. Again, whatever your opinion is about these issues is one thing, but what is important is that different angles were not considered, and people were not asked to collaborate on these issues. So even if there are policies coming forward about climate and the environment, they don't necessarily have the desired impact. Next slide, please. And so here in the UK, it's even worse, because we're not actually seeing a government that is trying to implement change in regards to climate and the environment, because we have a system that is failing us in regards to the climate and ecological emergency, and of course many other things as well. But why is this system failing? And as Rob said just now, actually a system that was set up to function in the way that it is, that obviously isn't working for the crisis that we are facing now. So the very nature of our system cannot come up with the right solutions to the climate and ecological emergency, because it's just crippled by the way that it's been set up. So the first thing that we're lacking is this sense of fairness. the system is essentially rigged against ordinary people. First of all, it's not truly representative. So just think about how many working class people live in the UK and how many of them are represented in our parliament. And then we also have a first past the post system, meaning most of us don't have any representation at all. And then we're lacking a long-term way of thinking in our current government. So the solutions that we need to the climate and ecological emergency are long-term, but because of the nature of the system, getting re-elected in 4 or 5 years' time, things get put off for fear that they will lose votes. And obviously, if the administration changes over the next elections, things will change again. The main priority in this system is to stay in power and not necessarily to do what is right for the common good. There will be no easy, quick fix to this emergency, which I'm sure everybody on this call here is aware of already. And so we need these long-term solutions. Also, things are going to have to radically change, and people are often scared of this word radical. It shouldn't mean something negative. It means that something is going to change to ensure that we have a future and that we have some chance of surviving, basically. So radical in this sense is just something really positive and potentially something really encouraging and something that we can do together. But for radical change to come, it can only work when we work together, unhindered by vested interests, lobbying from industries who want to preserve business as usual, and dodgy deals behind closed doors. Radical change comes from collaboration, working and deciding together, whereas what we see now is opposition and competition and just lots of shouting at each other, and there's no deep listening happening right now, which is blocking these radical changes that we need. And then also justice. So we cannot sort out the crisis without climate and ecological justice. And this is key in the third demand. So people and all life on Earth need to be protected and restored. And this is currently incompatible with the current political system, which inherently prioritizes material wealth over the well-being of people and planet. So if you want fair, long-term, radical and just solutions to the climate and ecological emergency, you need to care about the third demand. So and this is specifically the UK-wide Citizens' Assembly that I'm talking about, but Dandelion is now going to talk about various assemblies on all levels. Dandelion.
Great, thanks, Marion. Rob, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Yes, so I'm talking about community assemblies and assemblies on all levels, really. So, obviously running a community assembly embodies the principle that anyone who wants to can participate. It's a way of including as many people as a wide range as possible, and we can all experience deliberation and be part of bringing about change. One of the criticisms of citizens' assemblies is that there are only a relatively small number of people selected, and so they can be seen as exclusive and not succinctly representative, even though the process is self-sufficient and does actually give a representation of the population. The model of holding community conversations or assemblies and feeding into citizens' assemblies has already been used at the Global Assembly and for the Poland Citizens' Assembly on fuel poverty. So, and community assemblies are open to all. The freedom to participate in these augments the selection process for the Citizens' Assembly, which follows. So to have community assemblies first is a more inclusive model, and it's the way to go. Obviously, there are differences between citizens, peoples, and community assemblies. And might already know about the difference between citizens and people's assembly and community assemblies. Obviously, all of them are deliberative democracy. Everybody and people can participate. It's a group deliberation. The difference starts when it comes to what people get to be told or be informed before the assembly. In a People's Assembly, we usually only have speakers there that are necessary. So People's Assembly are also very self-selected, obviously. They're very short, and they often happen at, for example, Extinction Rebellion actions. They are discussions about what shall we do next. There are decisions about where the action should go next. Shall we leave? Shall we stay? Or what's our next target, for example. In a community assembly, we very often involve experts, stakeholders of the community, and people that might be affected by a specific problem to talk at the start of an assembly. And so you have an informed group of people there that are deliberating. The community assembly is also self-selected, so you are obviously and hopefully doing outreach and inviting your community to come to your assembly, but people are still deciding on their own to come. So in a way, it's very probably also not fully representative of the population, but self-selected. Community assemblies are usually longer than people's assemblies, about 1.5 hours and 2 hours to a day. And they can inform policy. It obviously is depending on this and depending on what the community assembly holders are deciding what to do with the outcomes. But it can mean that you're sending your outcomes and your deliberation to your local authorities for them to hopefully use this information to form their policies. Citizens' assemblies are a lot bigger. They usually run over multiple days. They are run by often run by specific companies that are dealing with the sortition to make sure that the people taking part in the Citizens' Assembly are representative of the population. The reason they are taking so long is that often at the start of the Citizens' Assemblies, you will have different experts talking about the topic, and so that all the people that are taking part in the Citizens' Assembly are on the same level of information to be able to discuss. And these outcomes of the Citizens' Assembly are hopefully taken seriously and do inform the policy of authorities. So we're now working on all, like I've said at the start, community assemblies on all levels, not just community assemblies. We do still work with people's assemblies in XR actions. That comes up very often. And then I suppose the next level is now that Rob said already that about 20 local groups around the country have decided to run a community assembly, are working together with other movements in their communities and looking at problems, not just around environmental, but also other issues within their communities, like housing or fuel poverty, and are discussing that soon. And obviously then hopefully we'll in the future, galvanized by all the community assemblies around the country, have our third demand met and have a citizens' assembly on the ecological and climate crisis. And I believe I'm passing over again to Marianne now.
Oh, yes. Oh, unmute myself. Yes. Thanks. Right. So how does it all tie together? How do we ensure that we don't just have a whole bunch of random community assemblies all over the country? Some of them will have their councils or their local authorities implement the recommendations. Some of them will ignore them, where we'll obviously go and occupy and put the pressure up. but it still feels quite disjointed, disconnected, yeah, how is this all part of the same journey that eventually will see us all together in one place? You can see here that the escalation part, there's several versions to that escalation part. So there's the non-violent direct action that, of course, we at Extinction Rebellion have a bit of a tradition of doing. So that would be, for example, the occupation of your local council, or of your metropolitan authority, for example, and really pushing for the local voices to be heard, and for that collaboration to start between local authorities and the people on the ground. But then we also want to escalate up towards the next level, which is where we're going to start talking to our MPs. So I think I want the next slide. Yes. So this is kind of the plan, and this is where we need your support, and well, we all need to be doing it together, really. So we've got community assemblies up and running all over the UK, and they're proving to be useful and successful. So success doesn't always necessarily mean that recommendations are implemented. It can also mean that communities are working together because, for example, there's residents associations or other local community groups that previously you hadn't been working with, but now, because you're planning this this community assembly together, you've actually started building this really great relationship, and there's trust, and there's an understanding. You know each other's faces, you have each other's names. That's extremely valuable for those relationships to be built up. So we would also consider that a success in itself as well. And then we're going to rev it up a bit. So at some stage next year, we're going to have coordinated days of visits to MPs' offices in their constituencies, but also in parliamentary offices. So depending a little bit on what we can manage to do and what's easiest for everyone. We want these visits to be friendly, coordinated, to build pressure. So we want them to be colourful, creative, and inclusive. So we want this to be open to everyone. Of course, we're very aware of the situation for MPs at the moment, and we don't want to scare them. We want to make sure that they understand that this is something friendly, and they may not agree with us, and they may not like deliberative democracy, but they must never feel that we are in any way a threat to them. So that's very important to highlight there as well. But we want this excitement, this wave of deliberative democracy that's spreading around the country to come to them, to the MPs. Some local areas may even have managed to invite their MP to come to one of their community assemblies. I mean, crazier things have happened, right? But if not, then we're going to go and visit them. We could even bring them some cake and tea. I mean, that's up to you. Be as creative as you want. But just imagine that on one recorded day, and maybe we'll have several of these days, imagine 650 MPs all over the UK being visited on the same day. This will have huge impact, and this will definitely make headline news as well. And our ask is, as you can see here on the right, is that we want our third demand met, which we hope by that time isn't just something that XR wants, but that everybody wants as well, and that everybody understands this is really the key to getting fair, long-term, radical and just solutions to the climate and ecological emergency. So what we want, our call to action, is an independently run UK-wide citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice, where people work together to come to the solutions we need, to ensure that they are fair and that no one is left behind. So we'll be asking the MPs to bring this to Westminster. We want them on our behalf, their constituents. We want them to be talking about this concept of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice in Westminster, and we want them to start pushing for it. Now, just because we've gone and brought them a slice of cake in their office doesn't mean, obviously, that this is what they're going to do and be like, all right, yeah, I'm convinced, I'm going to make sure this happens now. There's probably going to be a need for more pressure. So at that stage, we are hoping that by that stage, we will have the numbers we need to come back to Westminster with all of us. And again, not just XR, but everybody who wants to support this idea of this citizens' assembly, where everybody is potentially going to be involved with the decision making, learning about the issues, learning about proposed solutions, weigh off the pros and the cons and the trade-offs, and come together on that. So that is where we are going to escalate. So this is where the journey from your local groups, from where it will start with just a phone call to your local Friends of the Earth or your local housing association or whatever it is that you're doing right now, the really grassroots work, how that hard work is going to travel to come and bring us all together at Westminster at some stage next year. So I'm just going to quickly look at my notes that whether that is, yes, I think that is everything I have to say about that. We just wanted to check if anyone has specific questions about this specific part of the escalation in particular, because we can have a couple of minutes, just people wanting to talk specifically about this journey from the local up to the Westminster level. I'm more than happy to take some quick questions now, but otherwise we can move on as well. So I'm not sure if there are any, I don't know if there are any questions.
I'm just looking through those in the chat. I'm not seeing any on escalation so far, but I'll shout if I see one.
Okay, great. And we will also have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of the session as well. So maybe mull this over, absorb, digest, and we can move over to Costanza, who's going to talk to us about a real life community assembly that she just took part in. So can we move over to Costanza now, please?
Thank you, Marian. So yes, so can you hear me all right? Yeah, cool. So I will start by saying that, so we had this community assembly last month, and I'll start by saying that overall it was a very positive experience and a successful event, but we think there is a lot to learn from what worked well and what worked less well, let's put it this way, also thinking about the escalation plan that we just heard about. So I'll start by giving a bit of background about how the assembly came to be. So this started from the Dirty Water campaign. And here in Manchester, many local groups applied the Dirty Water campaign to the Mersey, that is the kind of main river in South Manchester. And during the campaign, there were various conversations among us about the fact that the issues surrounding the health of the river were really quite complicated, and we would all like to kind of educate ourselves further on them. So what we decided to do is that we linked up with other kind of local environmental and civil society groups that we had some connections to already, and we proposed to put together an event that was to be about the river and the health of the river. So in the original meeting with them, what was proposed was a kind of very classic event, right? So a bunch of speakers come in and tell you different things about the issues at stake. However, at that meeting, one of our extra members who had taken part in communities assemblies before and had also done the Trust the People 6-week course thought that sounded a bit kind of boring and potentially not so productive. So since taking part in those communities assembly, she had always wanted to organize one. And so that is kind of the chance she took and proposed that instead of doing a kind of more traditional event, we think about doing this as a community assembly. And of course, people that were not in XR weren't necessarily familiar with the idea of community assembly. However, when we explained it to them, they were kind of very excited. And so we all agreed that that's what we would do. So what was definitely very helpful in the kind of setting up of the assembly and the organization was that we already had some community connections. So that was helpful in identifying the people with whom to organize this assembly, but also on a kind of more practical level, finding, for instance, a suitable venue to do the assembly. So we ended up using a local church for free. But this was also a very good chance to both create new relationships and kind of consolidate existing relationships. Maybe also kind of showing a side of XR that people weren't too familiar with, and maybe in some of them at least like a bit better. So it was also very helpful to have in the group people who already had some experience with facilitation and with community assembly, but none of us were truly an expert. So we mainly had experience with kind of small group facilitation. So none of us had really run community assembly before. When it came to kind of decide how to structure the assembly, we used the community assembly manual. So that's on XR website. I think we will talk about this later when we talk about a bit the kind of tools that are available to local groups to organize assemblies. We found that very, very helpful and kind of easy to navigate. Of course, besides finding a venue and a facilitator, we invited speakers. And I'll talk later a bit about who we invited. And we advertised the assembly through our kind of usual channels. We printed leaflets that we left in various places, especially on the river, on the Mersey. And we also used the channels of the other groups that were involved in the organization. And that, of course, was helpful also to reach people that we don't usually reach through XR channel. So the question that we chose for the assembly was, how might we improve the health of our River Mersey? And we thought that formulating the question in terms of how might we do X may feel people kind of more involved and empowered. And I think that was the case, also judging from the kind of recommendations that came out of the assembly. So this was a bit of background of how the assembly came to be. And now I'm going to say a few things about how the assembly actually went, which I think it's, as I was saying earlier, interesting and important also kind of moving forward and thinking about how we link community assemblies to kind of other objectives of XR. So there were about 100 people that participated in the assembly. And starting with the things that went well, we were very positively surprised by how engaged people were and that by their level of participation. And a number of people afterwards came to us and just told us how they really liked the process and kind of felt empowered by it. So there was definitely this sense of empowerment from people. Yes, our assembly lasted for about 2 hours. It generally ran quite smoothly, so we were able to stick to time. So some of you might already be familiar with the structure of the community's assembly. So typically they are divided in 3 parts. So there is an input stage where participants listen to different speakers. There is the deliberation stage, which is done in small groups, of course, with small groups that are facilitated by appointed facilitators. And then there is a final integration stage where we kind of bring back the ideas of different groups to the assembly, and we identify the main recommendation that the assembly as a whole has. So we felt that the input stage of the assembly was very successful. And this was mainly because the audience had the opportunity to listen to a very diverse range of perspective on the health of the river. So to give you a sense of the kind of people that we invited, these included a representative from United Utilities, so that's the local water company, a representative from the Mersey River Trust. There was a presentation based on data from the Environmental Agency on the state of the river. We did invite the Environmental Agency, but they didn't come. There was another presentation from a local XR activist who had been especially active around dirty water. So the presentation was mainly about sewage. And there were 2 testimonies of local residents. So one of them was someone who had been living in near the Mersey for many years and had been exposed to flood risk. And the second one was a testimony by someone who's running a canoeing business on the River Mersey. So I've had experience of what the Mersey had been like for many, many years. And I think what was particularly helpful here was to listen to different perspectives from people and organizations who was very differently situated, including some speakers who were drawing on their kind of direct personal experience. Of course, as you probably imagine from the fact that there was also a representative of the water company there, different speaker had very, very different views on the matter, but I think that just was very helpful for the following stage. So that was the deliberation stage. And the transition between the two stages generally went fine. We could have maybe done a better job in directing people to different groups, paying attention to issues such as group size and gender balance, for instance. The actual deliberation went quite well. Our facilitators were really good. People were engaged and the dialogue was inclusive. Maybe one thing that it's important to mention, because we hadn't really thought about that, and it's something we had to address on the spot, is that we didn't know exactly what to do with people who might have a conflict of interest in respect to the matter under discussion, such as the person from United Utilities. So the question that we were facing is basically whether and how these people should be included in this kind of small group deliberation stage. We did end up including them in some of our small groups, but this created some challenges, mainly in one group, and I was in that group, because we had in that group basically the spirit of the community assembly was a bit lost, because the exchange started resembling a bit too much of a debate between basically the person from the water company and two local councillors. So it's worth thinking about whether and how speakers, and in particular speakers who might have a direct conflict of interest, should be included in the kind of small group discussion phase. So we then move to the integration phase. So this is the phase in which kind of the note takers who have been taking notes about the three main recommendations of every single small group come back to the assembly, report to the assembly. And the idea there is to kind of collect the ideas and then identify what can be the main, like, 2 or 3 top recommendation of the assembly as a whole. So what went well here is that it was quite easy to collect the different ideas of individual groups and also records which idea were supported by more than one group. But it was a bit trickier to identify what were the 3 top ideas or recommendations supported by the assembly as a whole. So what we found a bit difficult, so usually what's used at this stage is a temperature check to gauge exactly which ideas are the most supported. We find that running a temperature check with such as a big group, so we're talking about 100 people, was a bit tricky. But then the problem maybe wasn't with the temperature check itself, but rather than in part because we were worried about running out of time, we didn't probably induct people in temperature checks. So of course, XR people are familiar with that, but people outside XR aren't. So it might have been a good idea to do some kind of fun practice temperature checks, so people were a bit better and kind of were a bit more familiar with that. I think it might also be possible to experiment with different methods during this stage of the assembly. So maybe going back in pairs to discuss the different recommendations. So have another kind of small group deliberation moment. Of course, that would just have required more time, and it's not what we planned for. The final thing I wanted to say, and this is particularly important also in light of what we just heard about in connection to the escalation plan, and also the relationship between community assembly and local authorities, is, you know, what happens basically to the results, to the recommendations of the assembly. In our case, and this is something that we told to the participants beforehand, our main aim with the assembly was to kind of generate some ideas that could be the basis for future discussion and action within the community. So what we did is that after the assembly, we circulated a kind of summary report with the different recommendations, and we circulated the report to the participants, some local councillors, the water company, the environmental agency, and the river trust. So we hadn't originally planned to be the ones that take the results further. And I think this was because we didn't really feel like we had capacity. It was also our first time with, like, our first try with community assembly, and maybe there wasn't such a kind of laid out plan of how to do it in the first place. However, I think that was kind of helpful for the future, because we are thinking of potentially taking a different approach to the results next time if we organize a new community assembly, which is something that we have been discussing. Of course, not about the same issue, but about another issue. So I think our main aim was really to kind of stimulate these conversations and provide a platform for people to connect and act together. And I do think we did that, even though we might have done maybe a better job at creating a space for people to link up. And this was because when it comes to the nature of the recommendations of the Assembly, some of them were really, of course, very kind of structural political actions. So things like renationalizing the water company, which is not exactly something that we can achieve at the local level. But some of the other recommendations were about linking up kind of river community groups to kind of advocate and lobby for the interests of the river. So these are things that are perfectly achievable at the local level and things that people can kind of get together and do. The last thing I wanted to say is maybe about community assembly a bit more broadly. So yesterday I was in Leeds at the North Rising. So this is a kind of training and meetup event for XR North, and I listened to some feedback because we were running a community assembly workshop. I listened to some feedback from a very, very interesting community assembly that XR York organized. And they did something really quite different from what we did in Manchester. So I think this kind of really brought home to me the point that community assembly are a kind of container that can be molded in different ways, depending on what are the needs and the aims of different local communities. However, this can be done still. You can do that, so you can do different things while still promoting some of what are the kind of most important objective of XR. So empowering people, and I was really, really present also in the feedback we received after our assembly, showcasing deliberative democracy, as in a sense, building towards XR third demand, and also creating links with within our communities and also with other movements, which I think is something we achieved with the community assembly in Manchester. So I think we now have some time for question about the Manchester model, however you want to call it. So yeah, I'm happy if you want to ask me some questions about the community assembly. I mean, I must say, it wasn't even an XR Manchester community assembly. It was a community assembly organized by a local group within XR Manchester. Yeah, Mariah?
Oh, thanks, Costanza. It sounds really brilliant. I'm just thinking in terms of people probably feeling a bit overwhelmed, and it sounds like a lot of work. And do you have like some tips for people who are thinking about, I really want to do this, but I just feel like it's too much?
Yeah, I mean, I think what worked well for us is that we had so within XR there were like 3 of us working towards the event, and of course there were also people in the other groups that I was talking about. So I think there was a bit of a division of labor. So one was very much responsible for kind of selecting and inviting the speaker, and then someone else and myself were more responsible for, or kind of took a bit more of a lead in thinking about how to structure the assembly itself, conduct the facilitators, so kind of deal more with the structuring of the assembly itself. And of course, we also, like other people within our local group and within the other environmental groups, also played a very important role in doing things like, just kind of distributing leaflets and kind of spreading the word about the assembly. So I mean, I'm not gonna lie, of course, it was an undertaking, but I think it's something that if you have a kind of quite a fairly active local group, as well as if you have other groups that you can draw on for resources, but also ideas, I think it's something that is perfectly achieved.
Thanks.
So
I think there's some questions in the chat, which I think you can hopefully answer. So first there was, Nell is asking, what was the key question you asked in the Manchester Community Assembly?
Yeah, so for us, the question was, how might we improve the health of the River Mersey? So it was very much centered around, and this was because it came out of the Dirty Water campaign. So it was very much centered on, the Mersey, which is the river in Manchester, in South Manchester.
Amazing. And then also, what was the difference? What did the York what did York XR do differently?
Yeah, so York XR did various things differently. I'll just try to summarize them. Firstly, they run basically what we call, I mean, they called it People's Assembly, but this is mainly terminological difference. But really what they did is kind of run an entire day, and they kind of run two different community assembly in the same day. So the first one was more about how we can imagine a fossil fuel-free York. And the second one was, I mean, yeah, was a bit, the question I think was something like how we can preserve what's good about York or something like that, but was very much thinking about kind of drawing on existing local initiatives and local community groups and kind of work towards sustainability. So they had a structure in which they had two different assemblies. I think it was one in the afternoon and one in the, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And the other thing that they did very differently is that they had a much more visual approach. So when it came to both the deliberation stage and the integration stage, for instance, for the second bit of the community assembly, they created a map of York that allowed them to kind of put stickers on different parts of the cities to kind of visually see the places where there were community initiatives that they thought were successful. So yeah, I think the kind of the scope was one of the difference. Yeah, and also I think it was mainly an XR event. They didn't, but I'm not entirely sure about that. But as far as I remember from what we were told yesterday, yeah, it was mainly XR that organized that.
And then I think there's one more specific Manchester one. What other groups were involved in setting up the Manchester?
Yeah, so I didn't mention their name before because they are mainly local groups. So one is People, Planet, Place, Didsbury. So Didsbury is our local area. So this is an environmental group. Another group was the Didsbury Civic Society, and the third one was Friends of Fletcher Moss. Fletcher Moss is a garden in our area. So these were the three groups that we worked with. I think we might also have some hands. I saw them before. So Elvis?
Yeah, we have Elvis in the chat and then Ben. Yeah.
Thanks, Costanza. Yeah, just wanted to say that sounds fantastic. What you've got together in Manchester so far, that's brilliant. Can I just ask what's coming up? Have you got any dates set up as well? I'd love to get down there myself. I'm setting up assemblies with Humanity Project in the north, so yeah, I'd love to have a chat with you, and we'll see what we can do together. But I'd love to help in any way that I can.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. So there isn't any concrete plan at the moment, but there has been talks about maybe doing something around a different issue, namely air quality. So we are thinking about doing that, but we don't really have a plan yet. Okay,
fantastic. Is it okay if I forward you my details in the chat?
Sure.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thanks, Costanza.
So I think there was also another question in the chat, which is probably one of the most difficult questions, which is namely, wait, I lost it. Yeah. What changes became the outcome of the event? So I'm not sure if the question is what happened. So what were the recommendations? I thought the question was more like which kind of impact did the event had, right? Is that right? I'm not sure who asked that question in the first place. Let me find it again.
I think that was Paula.
Paula, yeah, right. So as I was saying, and I think it was very interesting to hear from the kind of different people who talked about the escalation plan. Originally, we hadn't thought of the assembly as, so we hadn't linked up with local authorities, and we hadn't really thought of the assembly as, you know, a kind of pressuring or asking the authorities to adopt the recommendations of the assembly, which is the model we heard about earlier. So we were really thinking about the assembly as a way to kind of collect different ideas and use that as the kind of the basis of actions that different people and different groups within the community could take together. I have heard that there are some people that are starting to kind of link up together. So one, for instance, is the kind of Mersey River Trust is thinking about kind of incorporating some of the recommendations of the assembly at the local level. So yeah, there's been some talk of people acting and kind of linking up on the basis of the assembly. And that was kind of the way in which we set up the assembly in the first place. Of course, you can have a different model, and maybe a model that has more of an eye in kind of directly affecting change, and kind of be the ones. I think an important difference is also whether you think of kind of yourself being the one kind of in charge of taking the recommendation further, or you kind of put it more out there and kind of you act as a way for people to link up and act together, which is more what we did. But as I was saying earlier, I also think that, you know, if we decide to do something else in the future, which is a possibility, I think we might think of kind of adopting a different model. I think that was a learning experience for us, right? Because it was really like our first try. And I think, especially when we started thinking about the assembly, maybe there wasn't such a clear path of how to do it, that maybe hopefully this call kind of contributes to creating.
Thanks so much. And there's one more question from Ben.
Just a quick one. Thank you so much, Costanza. Really inspiring, talk. I'm just wondering, did you get any kickback at all, you know, from having when you publicised it as being XR Manchester taking part? Did anybody react to that, or was it just taken fine?
So in part because it wasn't just an XR thing. So it wasn't necessarily publicized as such, right? So it was publicized as what it was, namely a community assembly on the question of the health of the River Mersey, right? So in that sense, I think that, and you know, we weren't like, we weren't at all kind of hiding the fact that XR was, of course, one of the main group organizing it. But I think maybe in that sense, and also just in order to get people that we might not have come otherwise, it was very helpful that it was seen as a kind of community effort and not something coming only from one group. I think probably, I mean, I'm less sure about that, but I think the venue might have contributed to that too. So we ended up doing it in a local church, which has quite a strong kind of community base itself, right? So I think the use of that space maybe also contributed to the sense that it was a community initiative, which is precisely what it was, right? Yeah, so I guess that's what I would say about that.
That's brilliant. Okay, we've got one more section which is really important, which is about the support that's there for you now. So we're going to hear from Denise talk about the support, and then we're going to have a Q&A, a general Q&A on everything you've heard tonight. So over to you, Denise.
Thank you. Hiya, yeah. So I've no doubt that your head is full of questions and thoughts, and there's a lot whizzing around in your mind right now, and there is a lot of organising involved, but we aim to provide a number of means of support for anybody that's looking to set up a community assembly. So to begin with, what I'd say is, you know, if your local group is actually thinking of running an assembly, a starting point, I would say, is to fill in a form that we've set up online. All of these links will be provided in an email afterwards, so don't worry about anything I'm about to tell you. But there's a form that you can fill in, which will ask you a few questions about where you're up to, whether you've got a question in mind, what groups you might be involved with, those kind of things. And then a gardener, somebody from the local group support team, will be in touch with you to talk about how we can help. So there's that practical help there. There's a Telegram chat. Again, the link will come in the email, so you can ask your questions, share your experiences there. Also, Fridays, 3 o'clock, I am now going to set up a drop-in, and myself and any other members of the Assembly team will come and join me on that. So again, to ask any questions or think through any sort of challenges that you're going through. And also, we are looking to liaise with allies as well, to see how we can collaborate in terms of providing support. And we've touched on Humanity Project and Trust the People earlier, and there are others. In terms of funding, there were questions that came up in the chat, and we estimated from funding from the Climate Emergency Fund that we were offered that if we had 20 groups, we could probably provide about 500 quid per assembly. I think we're over 20 groups at the moment, but so I'm going to say, you know, anywhere up to 500 quid. Again, if you're kind of thinking, well, what should you prioritize in terms of your spending, do ask the questions. I've also dropped a community assemblies email into the chat, which you'll get in your email afterwards. Let's see. Oh, and the other thing, of course, the fundraising team is now offering to come out to the regions and talk to groups about fundraising because of the sort of decentralization focus on the latest strategy. So local groups can find sources of funding, and that's something that I'm starting to focus on as well in terms of the assemblies. So do ask. In terms of training, so we've got a couple of training sessions coming up. We've got how to set up and run a community assembly, and that's happening on Thursday, the 26th of October, 7 till 9. There'll be a registration link in the email. And then there's facilitation training for community assemblies, Thursday, 2nd of November, 9 till 8:30. In terms of resources online as well, the Rebel Toolkit is, it's all being reorganized at the moment, but there's a really good resource that's going to be built on. But there's plenty there already on community assemblies, setting up and running, and we'll be adding a Q&A to that in time as well. Website info, so there's going to be a new section on the website soon, so watch out for that. The movement calendar, I don't know if everybody's aware of that, but again, a link can be shared in the email afterwards. So basically, if you've got an assembly planned and you've got your date and you've got your venue and you've got some ideas, then there is a form you can fill in to get that onto the events calendar that is on the website. And also that information will then be put onto a UK map. So anybody in your area, regardless of whether they're XR or not, will find you really easily and be able to come along to that event. Video, we're in the process of producing a video, so look out for that. That's coming soon. I think I've probably covered everything. Happy to take any questions on any of those things, but all of those links will be in an email afterwards as well, so no worries. Thank you. I'll pass back to Marine if there's no questions.
Yeah, or I can pass to Rob. I don't know.
We are going on to the question part. Do you want me to facilitate that? I will.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, so there's a thank you page, but I'm going to take us off the thank you page so I can spotlight some of the speakers, and we'll go to each of them in turn. But we've got 2 hands up already, so let's go to Ned first. How are you doing, Ned?
Hi, Rob. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. This is great. We just had an XR Huddersfield meeting today where we were talking about setting up a community assembly. So the link that I've just put into chat, Denise, is that the book you're talking about on the Rebel Toolkit? Because I just looked at when it was created. I thought there was something newer because it was updated 2 years ago by Ray.
Yeah, there is an updated version, and that'll go into, sorry?
I said I thought so, sorry.
Yeah. I'll that'll be in the email afterwards. And
Right.
there is a link I see in the chat for the job form for funding.
Great. And Costanza, you've got a question.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly a question. Maybe it's more of a suggestion. So, speaking also with the people who were organizing the, have organized the community assembly in New York, we were thinking that another thing that would be helpful is maybe to have a document. I don't know exactly in which form. Maybe the document is not the easiest to navigate, but with different feedback from people who had organized community assemblies before. So yeah, I thought I'll just put it up there because yeah, we've heard that. Also yesterday at the when we did the community assembly workshop, yeah, we've heard that that has been very helpful for people to also just gather the courage to actually do it, because I think that's just something that sometimes is standing a bit in people's way. But seeing that other people have done it might be, yeah, helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one of the big kind of benefits as well of being part of a network like Extinction Rebellion, where there's so many different things happening together at the same time, but that are, you know, functionally separate in different communities. So it's not isolated, and that way we really can, and we're really trying to find ways so that communities can kind of connect across and avoid people in the middle of things. Okay, we're going to go to Tony's question, and I'm going to be looking at the questions that have been in the chat while you're speaking. Over to you, Tony.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's related to what I put in the chat, but it's really about the selection and whether self-selection is going to produce a representative enough group of people that will be recognized by the authority as representing the people in the area. But how you as the community.
Tony, you're breaking up quite a
Assembly.
lot, but what I'm hearing is echoed in the chat, which is about how do you select the question that your community assembly is speaking about. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to speak to that? Denise?
You mean, well, I don't know if Denise has put your hand up, but maybe you mean me? What?
Yeah, go for it, Dandelion.
No, you can go for it, Denise.
Okay,
I've
so
spoken
yeah,
enough.
it's one of the most difficult parts, I think, of when you're planning your assembly, because your first biggest consideration is going to be what's the most crucial question for your local community. And if you're unsure, or there's 2 or 3 things that are floating around as important locally, I'd recommend that you go to some of the groups that you're going to be working with, that you're going to be collaborating with to put together the assembly, to find out what will draw the most people, because you want to get as many people as you can there to experience the assembly itself. There is a fine balance here between making it quite, setting quite tight parameters, because if you make it broader than that, then your outcomes won't be so great. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. What I would say is keep refining, and if you do want to really think this through with some support, then do come to the gardeners to thrash out what some of the trade-offs are there. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks. And Costanza, did you want to add to that? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just because I think our experience was a bit different, but maybe helpful to address that question, in the sense that for us the issue came first and the fact of organizing the community assembly came later. And I think the reason why that might be helpful is that, I mean, we could have also started by saying we want to organize a community assembly, but then we really kind of draw upon an existing campaign that people were already kind of involved with and interested in. So I think that's one of the reasons why people actually came. I mean, this, of course, you know, sewage and the state of river and seas in this country has been also an issue that have been discussed a lot in kind of public debate. But I think for us, it was a bit different because we started with the issue. And I think it's crucial to identify an issue that people are actually interested about and possibly already kind of mobilized to a certain extent on.
Thanks, Costanza. Last little comment from Dandelion, and then we're going to move on to the next questions. Dandelion?
I was going to answer another question because Tony meant self. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just saw Tony say in the chat about what he was meaning self-selected participants versus representatives. But that's fine, because the other question we answered was also a question from a different person about the topic, so all good. So there's the main citizens' assembly are important to be representative. So in the citizens' assembly, it is made sure that there's a sortition process, and that the people that are deliberating are representative of the population. Obviously, that is more difficult in a community assembly because a local community group as XR, or even if you are working with other movements, is probably more difficult to make the sortition process work, because it's a lot of work to make it clear. So I'm thinking that to make it more representative, it might be very important, or is very important, to get
not quite
doing outreach in areas that you might not have done outreach before, making sure that everybody knows about the assemblies. So don't just go to your local church that you hang out with all the time anyway, because that obviously would be a very non-inclusive way of doing it. But make sure that you talk to marginalized groups, talk to groups that you usually wouldn't, and hopefully if you're working with other groups already, or will be working with other movements, then that is also meaning that the outreach is wider. But I just wanted to make clear that there is one of the main differences between citizens' assembly and community or people's assembly is that by way of the sheer work of it being a sortition process, the citizens' assembly is a lot more work, and the community assemblies will always be, in a way, not 100% representative, because it's a lot of work. Not sure if anybody wants to add. I see Andrew.
That's great, Dandelion. Andrew, yeah, you've got a question or a point?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I just really wanted to add a little bit about the question that the community assembly identifies as the issue that's going to be the subject to the assembly and is going to be debated. So when you think about the question, it's also important to understand which tier of government effectively has actually got the power to do something about the issue. So, because unfortunately, the fact is that local authorities have very limited powers these days. So there's little point taking an issue and, occupying local council building if the council doesn't have the power to do anything about that issue. It's going to depend a lot on how local government is structured in the area. So it might be a borough council, it might be a local council, a county council, could even be a metropolitan authority. And if you're in the nations, it could be the Scottish Assembly or the Welsh Assembly. So again, there's a whole range of issues of relevance to the local community, but when you select the issue, just give some thought as to which tier of government can actually do something about the issue. And it may make more sense to go directly to your MP if it's an issue that really can only be addressed at a national level.
Thanks so much, Andrew. So yeah, and we've been kind of answering two questions at once and crossing over again and again, which is interesting. One is, quite clearly, how do you choose what question you're going to ask? And I think Andrew's talked to that, a lot of people. And the other one is, how do you choose the people who are going to answer the question and deliberate over it? And what method do you use? And I think that can be summed up quite simply as, yes, you don't want it to seem like just the usual subjects, but you want it to, you want it to be as broad as you can possibly make it. Sorry, it's late. My brain is dying. But I've got two questions for Marine from the chat, and they're very different, but hopefully you can take both on. First is, do we know whether an incoming Labour government would be more open to assemblies? And the second question is regarding escalation stage of community assemblies. Can someone please clarify what the stages are? You talk to MPs and then take the results to local council, you occupy local council, or you're going back to Parliament in London? Just a quick go through for both those questions. So Labour government, and then what's the stages?
Yeah, so it's really hard to say because there are lots of Labour MPs who are supportive of citizens' assemblies. But then we don't know in the actual Labour leadership who will actually form the government if they will be included there. And yeah, so I should have maybe asked Kathy to answer this. We know that Keir Starmer was supportive of the Camden Citizens Assembly, but then, yeah, is that going to be something that he would actually take into Westminster with us? There's no real way of knowing, so we'll have to wait and see. But it's definitely not going to happen if there's no public pressure for it. So that's, you know, we need to kind of ride that deliberative democratic wave and make sure that we're constantly talking about it so that our MPs know that we want that. And then, sorry, what was the second question? Oh, the stages. Yeah, so what the plan is that we start with creating with setting up the community assemblies, but by all means already tell your MP about the fact that you're doing it, and that, you know, perhaps you're targeting the council or your devolved government or whatever it is you're doing. Like, definitely already start telling your MP that this is what you're doing, and explain why, because, you know, deliberative democracy is what's going to help politicians come to better decisions. So you start with organizing your community assembly, then you're having this dialogue with the council, whether they will accept it, be part of it, you know, engage with it. If they're completely no, then, you know, NVDA, occupation, pressure. But that's sort of the local part of it. Once you've got a community assembly, either you've had the community assembly or you've had it and recommendations have been implemented or not, it almost doesn't matter, but demonstrate that you've had your assembly and that more assemblies are happening around the country. That is when we start to engage with the MP, and when we're envisaging having these coordinated visits to our MPs all over the country. But we think that will probably be something for next year, so not anytime soon, although by all means start engaging with the MP now if you want to. But we think the sort of action side of it, so that everybody going to their MPs on the same day, will be something that we'll agree with all the various groups around the country. So that's when we say, look what we're doing here on a local level. We are doing deliberative democracy. Why aren't we doing it in Westminster? We want you on our behalf, us, your constituents. We want you to start pushing for a citizens' assembly in Westminster. And that we push and push and push, and that, you know, we have these days of coordinated days of visiting until we have this critical mass of enough allies, and that, you know, it's not just XR saying this anymore, but that we're all saying we need a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice, and that we all gather in Westminster to put that pressure on. And then I think from an actions point of view is where, you know, that's what I'll let Rob talk about that more, but that is when we are staying there until the demand is met, because we're running out of time and we can't waste any more time waiting and thinking, you know, will it happen or not? So yeah, but I'll pass to Rob if you want to say anything more about that. Or...
Well, I think from a kind of strategic point of view, there's something really deep here, which is that as things are getting worse and worse, and I'm at the moment disregarding which government is in power, but things are getting worse and worse as we're seeing, with pandemics and wars and obviously the consequences of the climate and ecological catastrophe that we're experiencing right now. It's really important that when that revolutionary moment comes, we have something fair to put in place, and that's got to be on everyone's lips and in everyone's mind, and that's what the assemblies are, because we can't try and resolve this crisis through you know, a war government or a party political system that is as broken as it is now. That because we know that isn't going to help fix us. So from a strategic point of view, we really need people to be talking about assemblies 3 years ago. So that's what we're doing. And on that note, there's been a lot of good ideas in the chat for campaigns and things that should get started. People should get started on. Absolutely. I mean, this is XR. This is a decentralized network of people taking action. So please do it. You don't need to wait for permission, but do tell us what you're doing, because it means that we can also tell other people what you're doing and signpost other people to you. That's how the network works at its strongest. Don't avoid telling us, but we're not there to give you permission or anything, but we will help you with support if we can. There's a few more final questions, but I think we're running out of time, and we should try and end on time. So with those final things, I don't know if we can just wrap up here. I know there's questions in the chat and I can see a few people's hands up, but I think we should wrap up here. Respect everyone's Sunday evenings. We're going to put out loads of support in the chat. You're going to get the Zoom recording and the presentation slides and all of the other links that have been in the chat. And we're going to keep connecting in the Fridays to come and on our open Zoom sessions. So this is just the beginning of something. Yeah, and so I just want to round up there and say thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Marine. Thank you, Dandelion. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Costanza. And yeah, everyone else behind the scenes who made it happen. And thank you all for being here, and have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be emailing you very soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye, Gorilla. Bye.